The sun climbs over Karnak, 1190 BC. You're standing where countless others have stood, device raised, capturing monuments that claw at the heavens like prayers turned to stone. What you see is magnificence. Civilization frozen in rock, the fingerprints of gods, but there's something beneath you. Something archaeologists unearthed in 1923 that made them cease their work for 3 full days. A limestone fragment buried deliberately, scratched so faintly that even lamplight struggled to reveal it. Child-sized handprints, dozens of them, pressed into plaster that once ran wet along a passage leading to nothing, to nowhere. Small fingers, desperate force. And carved beside them in hieratic script, the rough, hurried writing of ordinary people, a single phrase etched 17 times, Mut does not hear us. Mut, the mother goddess, protector of the innocent, guardian of children. Why would girls sworn to her service, to the divine mother herself, carve a message claiming she couldn't hear them? What were they trying to whisper across 3 millennia of silence? The priests called these girls blessed. Official records, inscriptions polished smooth and painted in gold and lapis lazuli, named them pure ones, divine brides chosen of the gods. Beautiful language. But sometimes the most beautiful words are simply curtains drawn over the ugliest truths. In 1923, British archaeologist Margaret Murray was cataloging pottery fragments in the basement archives of the Temple of Mut at Luxor. Routine excavation. Measuring foundation stones. Then she discovered a sealed jar, clay, unmarked, hidden deliberately behind a false wall in a storage chamber that hadn't been opened in over 2,000 years. Inside, papyrus. Letters, 17 of them. She attempted to present her findings to the Egyptian Antiquities Service. They seized the jar. Classified the contents immediately. 3 senior Egyptologists, scholars who had devoted entire lifetimes to translating temple texts, refused to work on it. One wrote in his journal, "Some truths are better left buried." The jar and its contents remained locked in a Cairo warehouse for 71 years. What was written on those papyri? And why did the people who read them wish they could unread them? Listen. If you're the kind of person who believes documented history matters more than comfortable mythology, then you're exactly where you need to be. Every subscription to this channel helps us access restricted archives, translate primary sources, and resurrect voices like these from institutional silence. Hit that button, then let's descend deeper, because what comes next is worse than you're imagining. Egypt, New Kingdom period, 1550 to 1077 BC. The height of imperial power. The Golden Age. You've seen the films, the glory, the divine right of pharaohs, but here's what the museum placards don't mention. Egyptian temples weren't merely religious sites, they were economic empires. The Temple of Amun at Karnak alone controlled 81,000 workers, owned 421,000 head of cattle, managed 83 ships, and held more land than the pharaoh himself. These figures come from the Wilbur Papyrus, currently archived in the Brooklyn Museum. You can visit it. Read the bureaucratic precision of ancient accountants cataloging property like warehouse inventory. The priests weren't holy men. They were landlords with god names on their lips. Here's how the mechanism functioned. A farmer borrows from the temple, copper for tools, grain for planting season. The priests smile warmly. The gods provide, they assure him. The interest compounds, always in the temple's favor. First harvest arrives, not enough to settle the debt. Second year, still insufficient. Third year, the priests arrive at his door. The debt has tripled. The farmer faces 3 paths: forfeit his land, enter debt slavery, his entire bloodline for generations, or dedicate his daughter. The priests employed softer language. She will dwell in the house of the divine. She will be blessed beyond mortal measure. The official term was Hemet Netcher, servant of the god. The practical reality, unpaid labor for life. In Deir el-Medina, the workers' village, archaeologists uncovered contracts. Actual legal documents, fathers signing over daughters. One reads, in year 3 of Ramesses IX, the farmer Amenemheb, being unable to repay 15 deben of copper, does give his daughter Neferti to the house of Amun for perpetual service. Neferti was 9 years old. The The contract lists her age, her village, the debt amount, everything itemized, legal, witnessed. A child exchanged for 15 deben of copper, roughly 3 months of wages. But here's what fractures the narrative. These girls weren't performing menial labor. Many were taught to read to write, skills 90% of Egypt would never access. Some became gods' wives of Amun. They managed temple accounts, commanded hundreds of servants, wore gold, lived in what appeared to be luxury, power, education, wealth. So why the handprints in hidden corridors? Why that message, Mut does not hear us, carved 17 times? Why did Margaret Murray's jar contain letters written in secret, describing realities the priests never recorded? Something doesn't align. The answer lies in what the priests called purification. If the thought of a 9-year-old traded like inventory doesn't make you want to remember her name, then history has already erased her. Don't allow it. That's why we're here. Stay with me. 1896. British archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavates a priest's tomb at Abydos. Inside a papyrus scroll, a manual. Instructions for temple initiation rites. The document sits in the British Museum right now, catalog number EA10042. Middle Egyptian, procedural, clinical, like assembly instructions for furniture, except it isn't furniture. The text reads, "On the day of her entering, the girl shall be bathed in the sacred pool. Her garments shall be removed in the presence of the Wab priests. She shall be examined for purity of body." That word, examined. The text continues, "Her hair shall be removed that no impurity remain. She shall speak the oath before Amun, my body is the property of the god. My will is his will." She would be 8 years old. 10 perhaps, maybe 12. Standing unclothed in a chamber of adult men, repeating words whose meaning she couldn't grasp, legally binding herself to an existence she never chose. But here's where it becomes stranger. After initiation, these girls gained access to restricted temple areas, sacred spaces where even nobility couldn't enter. They handled ritual objects, studied astronomy, mathematics, music. One inscription from Karnak lists a woman named Nefertari as chief of the harem of Amun, who administered temple accounts and commanded 300 servants. Power but no freedom. They could manage treasuries but couldn't leave temple grounds, could read hieroglyphs but couldn't write to their families, could command servants but couldn't refuse priests. In the 1960s, Danish archaeologist Lise Manish was studying Temple Ostrika, broken pottery shards ancient Egyptians used as scratch paper. She discovered medical prescriptions, dozens of them, all for young women in temples, treatments for genital trauma, remedies to prevent forced conception, instructions for midwives attending girls as young as 11 through childbirth. One ostracon reads, "For the daughter of Painab, age 12, who bleeds after the god's blessing, apply myrrh and honey to the wound. If fever comes, call the physician. The god's blessing." Among the prescriptions, Manish found something else. A letter scrawled on broken pottery, handwriting slanting as though the writer's hand trembled, "To my daughter in the house of Mut. I brought you bread yesterday, but they would not let me see you. The overseer said you are purified now and cannot speak to those outside. I left the bread at the gate. Please eat. Your mother who remembers you." The daughter never replied. Temple servants couldn't send correspondence. But wait. Before you assume this was universal horror, it wasn't that simple. Some women in temples wielded genuine political authority. Hatshepsut, the woman who became pharaoh and ruled Egypt for 20 years, began as a god's wife of Amun. Other women entered temples voluntarily as adults, seeking education unavailable anywhere else. Safety from forced marriage. So what created the distinction? What separated the powerful priestesses from the girls carving desperate messages in hidden corridors? The answer is in one word the official records almost never speak aloud. Age. Margaret Murray's sealed jar. The one from 1923. It contains 17 letters written by a woman named Tentapet, who served in the Temple of Mut for 40 years. In them, she describes something the priests conducted every month. She calls it the monthly choosing. The official temple records, carved in stone, painted in gold, never mention what that meant. But Tentapet wrote it down. And what she wrote remained buried in that jar for 3,000 years. Margaret Murray's personal notes are archived at University College London. You can request them, fill out a form, wait 3 weeks. Then sit in a silent reading room while a librarian brings you a box. Inside her diary from the 1923 excavation season. March 12th entry, found sealed jar today in false wall of southern storage chamber. Clay, undecorated, deliberately hidden, opened it in field tent, papyrus inside, letters. I've read 3 so far, I wish I hadn't. March 15th, showed translations to Harrison and Blackman, both refused to continue. Harrison said some truths are better left buried. Antiquities Service offered £500 to stop publication. As if money means more than truth, the Egyptian Antiquities Service confiscated the jar. Classified the contents, claimed the letters were likely forgeries, despite dating definitively to late New Kingdom Demotic script. The letters remained classified for 71 years. They were finally released in 1994. Most Egyptologists still haven't read them. The letters were written in Demotic, the informal, cursive writing used for personal correspondence, not the formal hieroglyphs of monuments. The handwriting of someone writing for themselves. Writing the truth. Tentapet's account. In my 12th year of service, I was chosen for the monthly rite. I had seen other girls chosen before me. They always returned silent. Changed. They took us to the inner sanctum after evening offerings, 5 of us that month. The youngest was 8 years old. She cried. The overseer struck her and said tears were impurity. The high priest wore the mask of almond gold face ram's horns. He said the God would speak through him, that we were blessed to receive the divine seed, that our bodies were vessels for the God's pleasure. He said this was holy. Murray wrote in her notes, the account describes systematic abuse disguised as religious duty, organized, scheduled, recorded in administrative logs like grain inventory, because that's the truly evil genius of it. This wasn't chaos, it was bureaucracy. Temple records from Medinet Habu show rotation schedules. Girls listed by name with marks indicating their service dates. Ages listed alongside. The youngest recorded 7 years old, not a mistake, not an aberration. Policy. Tentapet wasn't the only one writing. The jar contained other letters. Other women had discovered it, this hidden vessel, in a forgotten storage room and added their own testimonies. One wrote, my name was Merit before they changed it to Meritamen. My father owed grain. The priest told him I would marry the god. He thought it meant honor. I was 11. There is no god here, only men in masks who say they speak for gods. Another. I have served for 16 years. I have borne 3 children to the god. They took each one from me after 3 years. My eldest daughter now serves as I do. I see her in mourning processions. She does not look at me. I think they told her I am dead. Murray's diary, March 15, 1923. I have read things today that make me question whether I should continue in Egyptology. These were children. This was systematic, recorded, managed. And we have been calling these temples sacred for 200 years of scholarship. Remember those handprints, the ones pressed into wet plaster in the dead-end corridor beneath the Temple of Mut? Tentapet's letters explain them. When girls were first brought to the temple for initiation, they were led through that passage. Dark, narrow, the priests told them, press your hands here against the wall. You are reborn beyond this threshold. Your old self dies here. The girls pressed their hands into the wet plaster. Children. Confused, frightened, doing what they were told. But years later, when some girls attempted to escape, and they did try, Tentapet writes about 3 attempts, they would return to that corridor. The only section of the temple without guard patrols, and they'd press their hands again. Same wall, same place. Older hands now, larger, pressing harder. And they'd carve beside them, Mut does not hear us, not a prayer, a witness statement, a message to whoever might discover it. We were real. We existed, this happened to us. But here's what makes this even darker. The priests documented everything. They kept meticulous records. Births, deaths, services rendered. They wrote about the girls' purity and devotion with the same bureaucratic efficiency they used to count grain stores. One administrative text from Karnak reads, Year 7, 3rd month of inundation, day 12. 5 new servants of Amun received the god's blessing in the inner sanctuary. The god was pleased. 5 new servants, ages not mentioned, the god was pleased. They wrote it down not out of guilt, out of religious duty. They genuinely believed they were serving the gods. If you've gotten this far, you're carrying this now. Same as Murray did in 1923. Same as those girls did 3,000 years ago. You can close this video, you can forget you watched it. Or you can subscribe and help us ensure these voices, the ones they tried to seal in jars and bury in archives, never get silenced again. That's the choice. Make it. By the late New Kingdom, around 1100 BC, something shifted. The position of God's wife of Amun transformed. It became exclusively held by royal women, Pharaoh's daughters, princesses, and they were required to remain celibate. No marriage, no children, no divine unions. Why the change? The Papyrus Harris, now in the British Museum, one of the longest papyri ever found, was written by Ramesses III around 1150 BC. In it, he describes reforms to temple administration. He uses careful language, abuses that had corrupted the sacred houses, impurities that had stained the divine order. He doesn't elaborate, but he restructures everything. Changes who can hold power, who has access to whom. Egyptologist Gay Robbins argues this was a direct response to growing evidence of abuse. Complaints that had reached even the pharaoh's court. The solution? Place women from royal families, women with political power, education, bodyguards in charge, women who couldn't be touched, women who could say no. The irony. The victims became the safeguard. By 700 BC, the god's wife of Amun essentially controlled Thebes. She commanded armies, managed treasuries, held power rivaling the pharaohs in Upper Egypt, and she remained unmarried, celibate, untouchable. A position of genuine authority born from centuries of abuse. But the lower-ranking temple girls, their situations improved only marginally. The reforms protected the women at the top. Everyone else, the system ground on. Here's what's rarely discussed. Some of the most significant reforms came from a woman who lived through it herself. Shepenupet II served as God's wife of Amun from 700 to 650 BC. She was dedicated to the temple at age 9, lived there for 68 years. And when she gained power, she issued a decree carved into the walls at Karnak, still visible today on the north side of the sacred lake. Let no girl enter service before her 15th year. Let no priest claim authority over her person beyond ritual duties. Let her family visit her thrice yearly. Let her voice be heard in disputes. She'd been 9 years old when they brought her to the temple. She remembered. And she used her power to change, imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely, the system that had harmed her. After 600 BC, something strange occurs in the archaeological record. We find fewer and fewer personal accounts from temple servants. No more hidden letters, no more carved messages, no more pottery shard confessions. Did abuse stop, or did record-keeping just become more centralized, more controlled? Did women stop writing their truths, or did someone ensure those truths would never be found? Margaret Murray's sealed jar remained classified for 71 years. When it was finally released in 1994, most Egyptologists ignored it. Too uncomfortable, too complicated. Easier to write papers about theology and architecture. Easier to marvel at the columns. Stand today in the hypostyle hall at Karnak. You can right now buy a plane ticket, walk through the same corridors where those girls walked. Look up at those 134 columns reaching toward heaven, each one carved with prayers. Hymns to the gods, stone fingers pointing at eternity. Beautiful, isn't it? Now remember, every stone was laid by hands that had no choice. Every prayer was sung by voices that couldn't say no. Every offering was made by people who were themselves offerings. We do this, still. We build monuments and forget the bones beneath them. We see glory and ignore cost. We call things sacred because it's easier than calling them what they are. Margaret Murray wrote in her unpublished diary, March 18, 1923, Civilization is not measured by the height of its monuments, but by the depth of its compassion for those who had no choice but to build them. By that measure, we have learned nothing. How many systems today hide behind beautiful language? How many institutions claim divine authority while protecting the powerful? How many times have you heard this is tradition used to justify cruelty? The temples of Egypt are gone, the priests are dust, but the pattern, that's immortal. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. Not because it was uniquely evil, but because it was so normal, so organized, so accepted, so thoroughly documented by people who thought they were doing holy work. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily we mistake cruelty for tradition, abuse for honor, silence for consent, then subscribe. Because the only thing more dangerous than forgetting the past is refusing to see its reflection in the present. One last thing. Remember Tentapet's letters, the 17 found in Murray's jar? The jar could hold 20, 3 are still missing. In 2003, an antiquities dealer in Cairo claimed to have found them. Said they'd been in a private collection since the 1920s. Said he knew where they were. He died of a heart attack 3 days later before revealing the location. Those 3 letters, according to Tentapet's index, which Murray translated before the Antiquities Service took the jar, contain names, specific names of priests, families who knew what was happening and stayed silent, officials who were paid to look away. Somewhere in Egypt, hidden in a private collection or buried beneath sand, those names are waiting, and someone doesn't want them found. The stones remember even when we'd rather forget.